بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على عبد الله ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So inshallah ta'ala we're going to start a brand new chapter in Kitab Salah from the book Bulugh Maram by Imam al-Hafiz Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah ta'ala, and that is Babu Sujud Sahw wa ghayrih, the chapter of Sujud Sahw. Now I think we all know what Sujud is. Sujud is what we call a sajda or a sujud, a prostration, where we put our forehead and our two hands and our two knees and our 2 feet, or at least the edges of them, on the ground. And Sujud Sahw is a particular kind of sajda which is legislated when a person falls into a sahw. And a sahw, it is to forgetfulness, or it means al-ghafla, yani being unaware of something, like not paying attention. So it can mean forgetfulness and it can mean not paying attention. So Sujud al-Sahw is a sajda which is legislated in certain circumstances when you forget a part of the prayer, or when you are unaware that you made a mistake in the prayer. And you can add a third circumstance to that, which is when you have doubt in the prayer. Certain types of doubt also, Sujud al-Sahw is legislated for them. And Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar, in this chapter, he opened the chapter Babu Sujud Sahwi wa ghayrihi, the chapter of Sujud Sahw and other types of sujud. Because there are other types of sujud. For example, Sujud al-Tilawa, the sajda when you come to a particular place in an ayah of the Quran and you're either actively listening or reciting. And there is, for example, Sujud al-Shukr, the sajda that you make by means of thanking Allah Azza wa Jal for a particular grace or a particular amazing thing that happened to you. So you make sajda to shukr. So there are other types of sujud that are legislated. However, the one that is, or the two that are particularly of concern to us are in the salah is Sujud al-Sahw, the prayer for the prostration for forgetfulness, and Sujud al-Tilawa, because in the salah we might recite a part of the Quran that has a place of sajda, and we might likewise make forget or make a mistake in our prayer. And the majority of our discussion in this chapter is going to be on the topic of Sujud al-Sahw. Now, I wanted to begin by giving you an overview before we get into the hadith. Because in my opinion, Sujud al-Sahw is one of those areas where lots and lots of people don't know what to do, and lots of people make mistakes, especially when we come to talk about Sujud al-Sahw behind the Imam. So let's first of all, and this is outside of Bulugh al-Maram, let's just take a little bit of time, could be 20 minutes, could be half an hour, to just give ourselves a bird's eye overview of Sujud al-Sahw. So the first thing that we need to do is to define what Sujud al-Sahw actually is. Like, how do you perform it to begin with? And it's performed by praying 2 prostrations. So not one, not just one time, but twice. Exactly as you would perform them in a rak'ah of the prayer. And this is important. Exactly as you would perform them in a normal rak'ah of the prayer. In other words, you will say Allahu Akbar and go into sujud. And you will say Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, Subhana Rabbi al-A'la. And you can make dua if you wish. Then you will sit up as you would do exactly in the normal part of the prayer. And then you will make your sajda again with the takbir, Allahu Akbar, exactly as you would in the normal part of the prayer. And you will say Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, Subhana Rabbi al-A'la. And then you may make dua if you wish. So we've understood that Sujud Sahw is exactly as the sujood is in the prayer. It's 2 sajdas, 2 prostrations. The dua is the same, the dhikr is the same, the way you perform it is the same parts of the body are on the ground. Everything about it is the same. And there are 2 places, or two, how should we say, 2 places in the prayer where you can perform sujood as-sahw. Before the salam or after the salam. Before the salam means you make your tashahhud. التحيات لله والصلوات والطيبات السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته until the end of the tashahhud. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم اللهم إني أعوذ بك من عذاب جهنم ومن عذاب القبر ومن فتنة المحيا والممات ومن شر فتنة المسيح الدجال until you finish your tashahhud. And then you say Allahu Akbar, Subhana Rabbi al-A'la 3 times. You sit up, you go down again, Allahu Akbar, Subhana Rabbi al-A'la again 3 times. You sit up and then you say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This is before the salam. This is before the salam. You do your tashahhud completely, then you make 2 prostrations extra, then you sit and you make salam to both sides. This is before the salam. As for after the salam, you do your tashahhud and you say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Then you say Allahu Akbar. You make your sujood exactly as you would in the prayer. You sit up, again you go down into sujood, you sit up and you make another salam. And you make a second taslim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And according to some of the scholars, you repeat the tashahhud as well. But we're going to come to this inside of Bulugh al-Maram. And in general, I'm going to say to you, you don't, because the majority of the scholars say that you don't repeat the tashahhud, you only make 2 sajda and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. But when we come to Bulugh al-Maram, you will see that there are some of the scholars who hold the opinion that you make the tashahhud twice. Once with the first salam and once with the second salam. But we're going to say this is not the strongest opinion. And the strongest opinion is that you only make the tashahhud before the first salam, then you do your 2 prostrations, then you make another salam at the end. And the scholars have general agreement, to the best of my knowledge. I don't know of, as far as I know, in all of the 4 madhahib, they have agreement that whether you do it before the salam or after the salam, your prayer is valid. But they disagree over which one is the right way to do when, if that makes sense. So they disagree, should it be before or should it be after, for whichever reason. However, they have agreement among themselves that if you made a mistake and did something that should be before the salam, after the salam, it doesn't matter, your prayer is still valid. And likewise, if you made a mistake and you did the one that was supposed to be after the salam, before the salam, likewise your prayer is valid. So the discussion about before versus after is a discussion of preference, not a discussion of that it invalidates your prayer. It's a discussion of whether it's the right thing, which one is the right thing to do. And the opinions vary tremendously, down from those scholars who say that the general principle is that it's before the salam, and those scholars who say it's before the salam, except in very rare cases, and those who have a formula as to whether it is before the salam or after the salam. And in order to understand the opinion that I'm going to give you, and this is a flow chart, I've got it in English, but I lost it temporarily, so I have to find it for you next week, because the website that put it up there in English has taken it down, and I don't know, I have to dig the copy out of my PC somewhere. But I have it in Arabic here, and it's originally done by Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah ta'ala, and the Shaykh provided, or his students from his work, provided a nice flow chart as to whether you do it before the salam and after the salam and what other things you have to do. But before we get into that discussion, it's really important that everyone understands that Sujud Sahu is legislated for two things, broadly. Or we could say even three, but what's important to understand is it's not legislated for missing a sunnah. So if you miss out a sunnah, Sujud Sahu isn't legislated. And it's not something that is allowed to do because you missed out a sunnah. So for example, a person forgets to say Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik. Dua al-istiftah. Is dua istiftah sunnah or wajib? We said it is sunnah. Therefore there is no Sujud Sahu in this. A person forgets to say A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. The scholars differed over this, but generally we said that if we take the opinion that saying A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim is a sunnah, or we take the opinion that saying it one time in the prayer is enough, then again there is no Sujud Sahu for missing this out. A person says Subhana Rabbi al-A'la one time, there is no Sujud Sahu, because one time is the minimum and three is the sunnah, or more than three, and so on. So we have to understand there is no Sujud Sahu for the sunnah actions. You forgot to point your finger in the tashahhud. There is no Sujud Sahu for this, because it's sunnah. Where there is Sujud Sahu are in the pillars of the prayer and the obligations of the prayer. And you can add doubt as a third thing. Doubt is really a totally separate issue. Doubt, put it on the side. But where we have to be concerned are the pillars of the prayer and the wajibat of the prayer. And what does it mean, the pillars and the wajibat? We've covered this before, but we just want to recap because it's really important to understand Sujud Sahu. You have to understand the pillars of the prayer and the obligations of the prayer. So the pillars of the prayer are those things that if you miss them out, your prayer would be invalid. Such as standing while you have the ability, Takbiratul Ihram, saying Allahu Akbar at the beginning of the prayer, reading Surah Al-Fatiha in every rak'ah, Ar-Ruku' as a position, not what you say, but just generally being in the position of ruku', standing up from ruku', making sujud on the 7 parts of the body that we spoke about, sitting up from the sujud, sitting between the 2 sajdas, having tranquility and stillness in each of your positions, the last tashahhud, sending salah upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and doing everything in order. These are the ones Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen mentioned. And there is some disagreement in some of them, like Surah Al-Fatiha and others. But generally, these are the ones that Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen mentioned are the pillars. As for the wajibat, the obligations, they are the ones that if you miss them out, they don't make your prayer invalid, but you have to make up for them with Sujud Sahw. And they are all of the takbirat apart from takbirat al-ihram. That means every time that you say Allahu Akbar, apart from the first time, which is a pillar, all the rest are wajibat, obligations. So when you go into ruku', saying Allahu Akbar, saying Sami Allahu liman hamida when you stand up from the ruku', saying Rabbana wa lakal hamd, saying Rabbi ghfirli in between the two sajdas, saying Subhana Rabbi al-Azim in ruku', Subhana Rabbi al-A'la in sujud at least once, and the first tashahhud. So when we say the first tashahhud, we mean the one where you sit in the middle and then you stand up and you keep praying. Okay? So that's the difference between the pillars and the obligations. What's the key difference here? When you miss an obligation, you don't go back and repeat it. All you do is finish your prayer, and there's some conditions to that we'll talk about later, but you finish your prayer and you make Sujud Sahw. As for the pillar, you have to make it up somehow. So you have to repeat the rak'ah, or in certain circumstances you can go back to the pillar. There are different situations, we'll talk about them. But the key thing is, you cannot leave without that pillar. You can't just go home and say, oh, I missed it this time, inshallah next time I'll do ruku'. No, you missed ruku', yani you cannot go home and just say, oh, next time I'll do it. Yani. As for the wajibat, yes, you can go home and say, next time I'll remember to sit for the first tashahhud. Next time I'll remember to say Subhana Rabbi al-Azim. But as for saying I forgot to make sajda, you can't go home and say I forgot to make sajda. You have to make that sajda up. Either you repeat the rak'ah, or in certain circumstances you can go back depending on where you are in your prayer. That being said, many of the scholars divide Sujud as-Sahw, including Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen, into three different situations. The first one is a situation where you added something into the prayer. You prayed an extra rak'ah. Or you prayed an extra sajda. Or you did an extra ruku', or an extra sitting when you weren't supposed to sit. You added something in. And the situation here is one of two situations. If you didn't realize that you added something until you had finished adding it. Okay, so for example, let's just say that you added an extra sajda, and you didn't realize that you had added that sajda until you had made it. In this case, what you have to do is to simply make Sujud Sahw after the salam. Sujud Sahw after the salam. So this is a situation where you have added something and you haven't realized until it's done. The other situation here in the same topic is when you realize in the middle, And in this case, you must return back to your original, yani what is correct. So in the middle of standing up, you realize that you're standing up for your 5th rak'ah. You must return back to your place, even if you are in the middle of standing or whatever. And if you realized that you've added something and you're in the middle of doing it and you've realized I shouldn't be doing this, you don't complete your sujud or complete your qiyam and finish all of your actions. You go immediately back to where you should be. So let's give an example here. You're praying dhuhr, you're in your 4th rak'ah, you do your tashahhud, and then you stand up. While you're standing up, you realize that this is my 5th rak'ah, I've done this wrong. Immediately you sit back down. You don't wait for you to finish the rak'ah and read Fatiha and read another surah and then make ruku' and then come up from ruku'. No, you just go immediately back down to where you were. And likewise, if you're following the Imam and the Imam adds something into the prayer and you know that he's added it, it's haram for you to follow him. So for example, the Imam stands up for the 5th rak'ah and you know that it's the 5th rak'ah. It's wajib for you to stay sitting down in the position of the tashahhud until the Imam comes back, if you're certain that he's added something. If you're not certain, you follow him. But if you're certain that the Imam has added something, you must go back. You must not go with him. You must not go with him. He may not be certain, so he may pray a full rak'ah, 5th rak'ah, because he doesn't think it's the 5th rak'ah, he thinks it's the 4th one. And the people are saying subhanallah, but he doesn't believe them, and he thinks it's the 4th one. But still, if you are certain the Imam is praying 1 rak'ah too many, you must sit and you mustn't follow him. And likewise, the Imam has to come back as soon as he realizes, he hears subhanallah, subhanallah, and he realizes he's praying his 5th rak'ah, he has to come back. And the Sujud Sahw is after the salam. So in both of those cases, the Sujud Sahw is after the salam. So let's go again. We said adding something into the prayer. We said the first kind of adding something is adding an extra rak'ah or an extra sitting or an extra sajda or an extra ruku'. And there are 2 situations. Either you remember in the middle, in which case you go back to your original position and you make Sujud Sahw after the salam, or you don't realize in the middle. Like you just finish and someone says to you after the salah, brother, you prayed 5 rak'ah. Again, the Sujud Sahw is after the salam. There's one more kind of addition. And that is if you make the salam before you finish the prayer and you make the salam too early. Now someone may say, how is that an addition? Isn't that leaving something out? But what they mean by this is you made an additional salam. And you made a salam that wasn't supposed to be made. And the reason they say that is that they say that you are still in a state of salah because you haven't finished your salah. You're still actually in a state of prayer. But what happened is you gave the salam too early. So you added a salam that shouldn't be there. This again has 2 circumstances. If a long time passes before you realize that you made the prayer too short, you must pray the whole prayer again. And there's no Sujud as-Sahw in this instance. So for example, you prayed 2 rak'ah, you went out of the masjid, or you started praying your sunnah prayer. You went out of the masjid, or you started praying your sunnah prayer, or you broke your wudu, or you went like out shopping and you came back and then you thought, subhanallah, I only prayed 2 rak'ah for Asr. In this case, you have to pray again, and there is no Sujud Sahw in the new prayer. The first prayer is invalid and you pray again. If the time is short, for example, you're still in the masjid, sitting down, you've just sat for a few moments, and someone says to the Imam, you only prayed 2 rak'ah, or you just moved a little bit to the side, and someone says to the Imam that you just prayed 2 rak'ah, or you just started to get up, and someone says to the Imam that you've only prayed 2 rak'ah. In this case, you may continue your prayer from where you left off. You may continue your prayer from where you left off, and the sajda is after the salam. So the distinguishing factor here is whether a long time has passed or not. If a long time has passed, to the extent that, and a long time, for example, the scholars say you broke your wudu, or you left the masjid, or you started praying a sunnah prayer because now you've started a new prayer, then this old prayer is invalid, and you just pray the prayer from the beginning again, and you don't need to make any Sujud Sahw in it. However, if the case is that the time is quite short, maybe a minute or two, 5 minutes passed only, you're still pretty much you're still in a state of wudu, you're still around the masjid, in the masjid, nothing so far, like nothing major has happened, you may continue your prayer from where you left off. Even if you spoke, even if you turned to your friend and said, did we pray our prayer short? Yeah, I think we prayed only 2 rak'ah. You can stand up and continue your 2 rak'ah, make your salam, and then make Sujud Sahw after the salam. So this one deals with adding. There are 2 situations for adding. One is adding something to the prayer, one is adding an extra salam by cutting the prayer short. Okay. Now we move on to the second one, which is leaving something out. So in this case, you have left something out of the prayer. So the first possibility is that you left out takbiratul ihram. You did not say Allahu Akbar in the beginning of the prayer. The moving of the hands is not such a big deal, but you didn't say the words Allahu Akbar. In this case, the salah is invalid and you have to pray again, and there is no Sujud Sahw in that prayer. If it is something other than takbiratul ihram, from the pillars of the prayer, okay? So now we're talking about missing out a pillar other than takbiratul ihram. Okay. In this case, if you have reached the place of that pillar in the following rak'ah. So for example, you missed out Surah Al-Fatiha, and then you have got to the point where you've started reading Surah Al-Fatiha in the next rak'ah. This entire rak'ah is invalid, and you must bring one more new rak'ah at the end of the prayer to make up for that entire rak'ah which is invalid, and you make Sujud Sahw after the salam. So let's say, for example, I forgot to make ruku', So I said, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, Wal-Dhalin, Ameen, and so on. And then I went straight into Sujud. Then I sat, then I went into Sujud again. Then I sat, and I stood up, and I started reading Surah Al-Fatiha. And I get to the point where I've gone into Sujud again. This time I've remembered. The entire rak'ah that I prayed without Sujud is invalid. Without ruku', is invalid. And I have to now stand up at the end of my prayer and add one more rak'ah to make up for that rak'ah that I missed, and I make Sujud Sahw after the salam. If I haven't yet reached that point, so for example, I read Surah Fatiha and I missed out the ruku' and I went into Sujud, but I haven't yet got to the ruku' yet in the next rak'ah, and you haven't got that far. I'm still in Sujud. It is obligatory for me to go back to that ruku'. Yani I stand up from Sujud, I go back into ruku', I don't add any more rak'ah at the end of the prayer, and I make Sujud Sahw after the salam. So again, we're talking about the pillars here. We're talking about missing a pillar. We're talking about missing a pillar. If you miss Takbirat al-Ihram, your salah is invalid. You pray a brand new prayer, and that prayer does not have any Sujud Sahw in it because you're praying that prayer from new. If you missed something else from the pillars, then if you have reached its place in the following rak'ah, meaning you've gone through a whole rak'ah and you've started ruku' again, and you missed your ruku', but now you've reached ruku' in the next rak'ah, the whole rak'ah is invalid, and you have to bring it again at the end as though you came late. As though you're a late comer, you bring a new rak'ah at the end completely, and you make Sujud Sahw after the salam. If, however, you haven't got that far, so you missed ruku', you went into Sujud, but you haven't got back to ruku' again, you haven't gone that far, you're only just still in the same rak'ah, then stand back up, go back into ruku' where you should be, finish your prayer and make Sujud Sahw after the salam. You do not need to add another rak'ah in this case because you've gone back to where you should be. What about the wajibat, the obligations? If you forget an obligation, one of three things apply. If you forget an obligation, one of three situations apply. Either you remember it while you're still in the right position. For example, I'm in Sujud and I forget to say Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, and I'm just sitting silently thinking about my dinner or something like that. And then the Imam says Allahu Akbar. I remembered, Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, and then I come up. And there is no Sujud Sahw for this, because I said the words in the correct place. Even if I was a little bit, a few seconds late, or I didn't say it right at the beginning, but I remembered before I moved from the position that I was supposed to say it in, so I say it one time and I go up. For example, I'm in the tashahhud, first tashahhud, and I'm about to ignore it. I'm about to just stand up. But before I move from actually the position of the tashahhud, I think, tashahhud. I can just start it and there is no Sujud Sahw in this case, because I didn't move from the place where it was due. I just forgot about it for a few seconds and then I brought it in the place where it was due. The second situation is that I remember it after having moved, but before reaching the next pillar. So for example, I forgot the first tashahhud, and before I reach the next pillar, which is standing up straight, and I'm just halfway there, I realize. In this case, I return back to the sitting place, I do the tashahhud, and I make Sujud Sahu after the salam. I think this should be, I don't know, I think in this flowchart maybe there is a mistake and it should be before the salam, but I will check that one. As far as I remember, that should be before the salam. But anyways, you get the idea. In this case, I missed out a wajib. For example, I missed out saying Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, and I start coming up from ruku', but I haven't yet stood up still. I haven't yet got to the next pillar of standing after the ruku'. And I just got like up a little way. I go back and I say Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, and I make my Sujud Sahu. The third circumstance is that I remember after I have started the next pillar. So I forgot about the tashahhud. And I stood up straight and I started reading Surah Al-Fatiha, and then I remembered, my tashahhud. In this case, it is not allowed for me to return back to my position. It's not allowed for me to do that. And I make Sujud Sahu before the salam. I make Sujud Sahu before the salam. So once again, this is with relation to the wajibat, leaving out the wajibat. Three circumstances. Either I remember when I haven't moved, in which case I do it and there is no Sujud Sahu. Or I remember after having moved but before having started the next pillar of the prayer, in which case I go back and I complete it and I make Sujud Sahu. And the third circumstance is if I've started the pillar and then I remember that I've started the next pillar of the prayer, and then I remember, in this case, it is haram for me to go back from the pillar to the thing that I forgot, in which case I just leave it and I make Sujud Sahu before the salam. Okay. That is the second one, which is missing something out. So the first one we did is adding something in. The second one we did is missing something out. The third one is doubt. And there are two situations with regard to doubt. There are two situations with regard to doubt. The first one is that the person has an idea of which one is correct. So he says, I don't know if I prayed 3 or 4. 3 or 4. You know, sometimes that happens to you. You're in sujud and you're thinking, 3 or 4, 3 or 4. Is it 3 or 4? Then you become confident it's definitely 4. No, it is 4. It is 4. I'm being silly. It's 4. In this case, you act upon what you are leaning towards. And you act upon the thing which you have come to believe is the truth. And you make Sujud Sahu after the salam. This is one case where it's very important that it must be after the salam. Why must it be after the salam? Because there is no need to add a sajda into a prayer which may well be correct. And you have a moment of doubt, you then get rid of your doubt. It's not like you have a moment, you're doubting the whole prayer. You had a moment of doubt, then the doubt leaves you. So you make Sujud Sahu after the salam, so that you don't ruin a prayer that is already complete and correct by adding something that isn't a part of it. And the second situation is where you do not have an idea of which one is correct. In other words, your doubt persists. In the first circumstance, your doubt doesn't persist. You doubted, but then your doubt goes away. You make Sujud Sahw after the salam. In this case, you don't know which of the two is correct. You don't know if you prayed 3 or if you prayed 4. And you come and you're just like, I have no idea. So you stand up, you base it on what is certain, which is the lower number. You stand up, you pray one more rak'ah, and you make Sujud Sahw before the salam. Why before the salam here? Because here you definitely made a mistake. Even though the number of rak'at might be correct, but you definitely made a mistake in the sense that you got to a point where you really don't know whether your salah was correct or not. And that's deserving of Sujud Sahw before the salam. As opposed to the first instance where you had a moment of doubt, then the doubt left you. And so the majority chance is that actually your prayer is completely correct anyway. So you make Sujud Sahw after the salam. And that is the summary that Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala gave. The only one I have a doubt over is this one with regard to when you start moving from your place, you leave a wajib, you start moving and you go back again. Is it before or is it after? Here it's written after, but it's written in a strange way. It's written make salam, then make sujud, then make salam. But in this, as I remember, it was before, but I will check that. We're going to come to it in Bulugh al-Maram anyway. This is just an overview. Now the last thing that I want to give you an overview of before we begin the ahadith, and probably won't begin them today, is the issue of Sujud Sahw behind the Imam. And there are two major concepts here. First of all, by the way, that we know that there is no Sujud Sahw for an individual praying behind the Imam in something that they do wrong, as long as it was done wrong behind the Imam. That's the first point. So for example, I'm praying behind the Imam and I forgot to say Subhana Rabbi al-Azim behind the Imam. There is no Sujud Sahw for me here, because the salah of the Imam is enough for me. There is no Sujud Sahw for me when I make a mistake behind the Imam as an individual. But what happens if the Imam makes a mistake? The first situation you've got to ask is the sujood before the salam or after the salam? It doesn't matter whether you believe it should be before or after, but did the Imam do it before or did the Imam do it after? This is the first issue. Or actually, sorry, before that we have one more issue. If you are praying, if you have been praying the whole prayer with the Imam, you're not running late, you don't have anything extra to pray, then you make sajda with the Imam and the issue is finished. This is the first one. So I'll repeat that again. You're praying with the Imam and you're not running late. You were with him from the beginning of the prayer or from Surah Al-Fatiha or whatever. Or from the ruku'. You're not missing any rak'at. You're not going to stand up and pray. In this case, the issue is very easy. You just follow the Imam. If he does it before, you do it before. If he does it after, you do it after. It's an easy situation. The difficult situation for the Imam is when you still have something to pray. When you still have something left to pray, and the Imam makes Sujud Sahw. So at this point, you still have a rak'ah left to pray, or 2 rak'ah, or 3 rak'ah, and the Imam is making Sujud Sahw. So that there are only two questions you need to ask yourself. The first one is he making Sujud Sahw before the salam or after the salam? If before the salam, then follow him. If after the salam, stand up and continue praying and don't follow him. This is the first point. If the Imam is making, this is for the one who is running late, and he has one rak'ah to make up, or two, or three, or four, and the Imam is making Sujud Sahu. If the Imam makes it before the Salam, he should follow the Imam. Based on the Hadith, إِنَّمَا جُعِلَ الْإِمَامِ لِيُؤْتَمَّ بِهِ. The Imam has been made to follow. If he's making it after the Salam, it's not allowed for you to follow the Imam. Because by this time you cannot follow him in the Salam. The Imam says, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. It's haram for you to follow him in the Salam. Because you still have a prayer to make up. You can't make Salam, you can't just add a Salam into your prayer. So at this point you have to stand up and ignore the Imam. But there is now a second question. And it's the same whether the Imam does it before or after. And that is, do you repeat Sujud Sahu at the end of your prayer? So you came late, the Imam made Sujud Sahu before the Salam, you copied him. Or the Imam made Sujud Sahu after the Salam and you didn't copy him. In either circumstance, when you finish your prayer, should you make Sujud Sahu or not? And the answer to that is very simple. If you were present when the mistake was made, you make Sujud Sahu yourself after the prayer, regardless of whether you have or haven't made it with the Imam. If you were not present for the mistake, meaning the mistake happened, you weren't in the masjid, and you were outside, and then you came and joined the salah after the mistake, you copy the Imam for his, if it was before, or you ignore him if it was after, and you don't make Sujud Sahu yourself, because you have no reason to make Sujud Sahu, because you weren't present for the mistake. If, however, you were present for the mistake, in both circumstances you make Sujud Sahu. Even if you've already made it with the Imam, you make it again because you made it in the wrong place. You made it in the middle of the salah instead of at the end of the salah. Therefore, you must repeat Sujud Sahu yourself after you have finished your prayer, either before the Salam or either after the Salam, according to the rules that we laid out. And that more or less is an overview of Sujud As-Sahu. In all honesty, this is one of those things that really lends itself to a flowchart. And really, it's one of, like, when you see it as a flowchart, it's so easy to understand. And when you hear it being described, it's like, it gets really complicated, which is why I wanted to give you the overview. If you just type in Arabic in Google, Sujud As-Sahu, and go to Google Images, that flowchart of Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen comes up straight away. I translated it into English and corrected the mistakes, if there were any in it. I corrected them. Like typos in it and stuff like I corrected them. If I'm hoping I can find that copy. It's been taken down online, but I'm hoping I can find the original copy on my hard disk, and then inshallah I will upload it to KALEMAH's website, and you guys can download that. Otherwise, we can just make it again, inshallah. We'll just probably during the week just draw it again, inshallah. But it really helps. Think of Sujud As-Sahu in 3 different areas. Adding something, and be careful, that includes adding the Salam too early. Taking something away, either it's a pillar or either it's a wajib. And doubt. And doubt is either, like we mentioned, those 2 situations, either you know either you have an idea of what's right, or you have no idea of what's right. And it works very nice as a nice flow chart. And with regard to the Imam, the first question on the flow chart, the Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen didn't do the one for the Imam, but I was thinking to add it. The first question on the flow chart for the Imam is, did you pray the whole prayer with the Imam? If you prayed the whole prayer with the Imam, you copy whatever the Imam does, before the Salam or after the Salam, and you have no problem. If the answer is no, you didn't follow the whole prayer with the Imam, then the question comes, is the Imam doing it before the Salam or after the Salam? If before the Salam, then you follow him. If after the salam, you don't. Then another question comes from both, regardless of what the answer to that question was. Did you witness the mistake? Were you praying with the Imam when the mistake was made? If so, repeat Sujud Sahu after your own prayer. If not, don't repeat Sujud Sahu after your own prayer. And that summarizes the issue of Sujud Sahu. And inshallah ta'ala from next week, we will begin with the ahadith in Bulugh al-Maram, where we'll look in more detail, we'll cover some differences of opinion among the scholars, some nuances. We'll try and see if we think that flowchart needs editing, because we might, as you study more, you sometimes come to the conclusion that you don't agree with the flowchart. And that's, sometimes that happens. I mean, I wrote the translation of that flowchart probably 5 years ago. And I haven't revisited the issue since then. Maybe when we are revisiting the issue in Bulugh al-Maram, we will come to a different conclusion to what we said now. It could be. We could turn around and say, actually, I think that this should be after the salam. I think this should be before the salam. Or we could take the opinion of some of the scholars, among them some of the Shafi'iyya, for example, who say, just do it before the salam unless you can't do it before the salam, in which case you do it after the salam. And which is just like a very simplistic version. And you just do it before unless you can't, because you didn't know about it, so do it after. Which one of them is closer to the sunnah? Which one does the evidence support? This is what we're going to look at in Bulugh al-Maram in quite some detail. It's not a very long chapter, this chapter in Bulugh al-Maram. 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages. And then there's a topic on Sujud al-Tilawa. It's only three pages. So it's quite possible that in 2 weeks maybe, we will finish the topic of Sujud al-Sahu, maybe a week on the topic of Sujud al-Tilawa, and we've got other topics. Now the topics are going to move quite quickly, because those of you who've been following the class, you'll realize that the chapter of the description of the prayer, it took quite a long time, to finish that chapter. But this point now, we're into some of the shorter chapters, and we just some of them will just be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, new chapter, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, new chapter. Because these are now getting into that. I mean, there are some slightly longer ones. Salat al-Tatawwu', the voluntary prayers, the salah behind the Imam. So there are some little bit longer ones, but generally the classes are going to be moving quite quickly now. I hope so, inshallah. Inshallah ta'ala, we're really trying to push through the salah. There's still a lot of Kitab al-Salah left to go. But it would be my aim, before we finish this year at least, to at least have reached Kitab al-Zakah. It would be, inshallah, really nice. I know we have a lot left to do, but it'd be nice, before we finish. When I say the year, I don't mean December. I mean the year as in the teaching year. So the classes stop at Ramadan usually. So it would be nice by Ramadan if we could have finished Kitab al-Salah and started Kitab al-Zakah. It would be really nice, because inshallah it will give us motivation to keep on going and keep on getting through the book. And in terms of the book, we are probably getting towards having done a third of the book by printed pages. I'm not sure by number of hadith, but by if you look at the number of pages within the book, from my copy, we're certainly a quarter of the way through the book, if not perhaps a little bit more than that. So inshallah ta'ala, we'll be starting the chapter on Sujud al-Sahu and the other types of sujud. We'll be starting that inshallah ta'ala next week on Wednesday, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And we'll stop there, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. Salatu wassalam ala nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.